David Bahnsen. Oh, good. You're better than James Lilac. You know something about economics. How are you, David?
I'm doing great, and I appreciate that very nice compliment.
Well, you're actually, I called you today because I wanted a technical explanation of what a non tariff trade barrier is, because that's been thrown around a lot. I know you hate the tariffs. Everybody knows that who listens to commentary or National Review. Everybody hates the tariffs who's a free trader. But would you explain to me what a non tariff trade barrier is, or at least the universe of them?
Well, I mean, it is an abstract term. A non-trade barrier or non-tariff barrier is a barrier to trade that isn't specific to the taxation that a tariff is. And so it's a sort of catch-all term for other things somebody can do to try to impede the flow of goods and services. And so the term was supposed to be a part of what the White House announced last week, and they instead chose to create the new policy. And this is what's caused all the mayhem in the economy around the trade deficit, just simply around countries that happen to sell us more than we sell them. So non-trade barriers are basically issues that aren't tariffs that impede trade.
An example that is often cited but never explained: currency manipulation. In response to the Liberation Day announcement, China devalued its currency. What's that? What's that do to me and to Americans, David Bahnsen?
Well, most people want to live in a country with a strong currency. And the question is what we mean that they devalued. The yuan went down relative to the dollar. The dollar went down relative to a bunch of other currencies substantially. One of the biggest down days for the dollar, Friday. The reason you're right, Hugh, that a lot of people don't want to define it or get into it is because it's a very tricky thing for America to have to define when we're not exactly squeaky clean here with $9 trillion of quantitative easing that took place after the financial crisis and COVID, or running ourselves at a 0% interest rate for the vast majority of the last 15 years or so. There's now been 2 years we've been off the zero bound. Those were all things we did to affect our own monetary policy. But they have the impact, of course, of manipulating our currency relative to others. Other countries are doing the same. And what the only governor to that is market forces. China weakens its own currency enough, it hurts their ability to transact. So I've now gone through this 3 times here in my career where China was manipulating their currency to the downside during the Bush Jr. administration. They were then manipulating their currency to the upside during the Obama administration. And now they're allegedly manipulating it to the downside again. So there's different policy goals that countries have at different times.
So, how do we measure that whether or not that's a trade barrier? Because the formula that the White House put out, even if it makes sense to you, it doesn't make sense to me. And if you listen to Scott Bessent or Peter Navarro or the Secretary of Commerce, Howard, I can't remember his last name, you get a different, Lutnick, you get a different explanation, right? No one has the same set of talking points.
Well, this is a part of the big problem right now in markets, is exactly what you just said. Markets have noticed the same thing that you and I'm sure our listeners have noticed. There's not just different talking points, but in some cases, quite contradictory talking points.
Yes.
In terms of how to measure if currency is a non-trade barrier, I'll rephrase the question. How do you measure if a policy at a store is a barrier to doing business? If all of a sudden you notice people are less likely to do business. So to the extent that China weakens its currency or strengthens its currency one way or the other to a point that it impedes trade, you would see it in declining trade. Now, I have absolutely no doubt that China would like to use its currency as a weapon to benefit itself in trade. And I have no doubt the United States would like the same. And I equate that basically to how buyers and sellers have different interests. And if we're not going to be linked to a global standard, if we're not in a Bretton Woods system, which is what Secretary Bessent has criticized, then countries are going to do that. The way to stop it, of course, is through market forces.
So let me make sure I get you to weigh in on this. When World War II ended, we were the only people that made any, I mean, we were the only economy left standing that wasn't bankrupt or destroyed. So we could afford the Marshall Plan. When the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, we were the rich relative that could bail everybody out in the Eastern Bloc. We could do lots of things for people. This is a new world where we're back to bipolarity and we are in Cold War 2.0 and China is our enemy. Does that, in your view, justify any of the measures the president took last week?
It makes it all worse, because if that is the case, if your premises are correct, which I'm mostly willing to grant, because you know you and I are equal footing as anti-communists.
Correct.
Hugh, why in the world would we mix Japan, South Korea, India, Vietnam, Canada, Mexico, allies, in the same mixed bag with China? All we had to do to get the most maximum leverage with China is separate everybody else. Go through and work the different trade deals, economic deals, what the currency package was going to be. There's a whole lot of things that could have been done. Then go deal with the China problem separately. By putting it all together, it has weakened our hand with China substantially when we had a much stronger hand 2 weeks ago.
Now, David, sometimes you have to shout to get the room to shut down. So the president shouted at the world. Best possible explanation. President needed everyone's attention, wanted everyone in the room so he could tell them all, Cambodia, you don't get to come in because you're basically a vassal state. Vietnam, we need you to help us more. We don't want you to cross-ship Chinese goods. Mexico, we don't want China sending fentanyl precursors here. Japan, we don't want you adding value. And EU, we don't want you dealing. Maybe he just wanted everyone in the room.
Well, I think you know that I disagree with that interpretation and believe as a conservative in limiting principles. I think that there's a French revolutionary spirit behind getting the attention of everyone in the room. But in this particular case, I do believe in law and order. I believe in the constitutional methodology of how taxes are supposed to be imposed. But also, I believe in dealing with allies different than adversaries in terms of a foreign policy of moral clarity. I also don't believe that we got the attention of people by threatening to tariff Switzerland, who has no tariffs on us, or by cutting off the flow of coffee and bananas into a country that can't make its own coffee and bananas. What we've done is message an incoherence. And so that's where my criticism comes from, is I think there's a lot of things he wants to do that I want him to do, and I think we went about it the wrong way. But Hugh, ultimately, we have to define the objectives. You use the Cold War 2.0 analogy. If we're going to continue equating this with geopolitics, foreign policy, military struggle, you have to define the objective. And is the objective we want to buy less things from other countries?
No, the best case I can come up with, and it's not comprehensive, is that we intend to isolate China and to do so quickly in order to cripple their economy and perhaps divert an invasion of Taiwan. But I know it doesn't answer every question. But then again, you didn't give me a perfect definition of trade barrier, David Bahnsen. But I still go to dividendcafe.com every day, as you should, to get what David writes, because he's really, really smart on this stuff. David Bahnsen, thank you.